Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be taking a look at Union Number 1, which is a comic book that unfortunately was not terribly successful, but I still really enjoy it. Let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in June of 1993, you may notice that the cover seems to have a rainbow type of effect on portions of it. That's because this cover is printed with what is known as holochrome or perhaps holofoil. I had a hard time in my research trying to figure out what the main difference between those two things are. Holochrome is essentially the same process as chromium, where the cover is printed on cardstock and then given a metallic look to it. The main difference between chromium and holochrome is that chromium will remain the same color no matter what angle the light is hitting it from, whereas holochrome gives the rainbowish, aka hologram appearance as the light changes the angle that it's hitting it at. So again, it's not really that big of a difference other than, they're both shiny, but one's a little more colorful. Either way, it was more just a marketing gimmick that was super huge in the early and mid 90s and has started to make a little bit of comeback in more recent years, but still not to the same degree that we had it that back then. Mike Heisler, co-creator, story, and letterer. Mark Texiera, art. Joe Chiodo, with Wendy Fouts and Paige Apfelbaum, I believe, on colors. Jim Lee, co-creator. Ben Fernandez, color separator. Kevin Cunningham, producer. Joe Mendoza, editor. Those of you who have been watching several of my other early image videos may recognize the name of Mike Heisler. He was lettering a large number of early image titles. And this is, I believe, his first written story of his own book. And I had completely forgotten until I opened this book back up and looked at it again that Jim Lee was the co-creator on this book with him, and that this book was part of Wildstorm, or more specifically, Homage, which was a subdivision of Wildstorm, which unfortunately means that Union is now owned by DC, and that means we're probably never ever going to see Union utilized again in comics, because DC seems to only really care about Grifter when it comes to Wildstorm characters. We see here on the very first page an image of Chichester, New York, which is a small town about 30 miles north of New York City. It doesn't have a high population, really kind of an every town USA type of feel to it. Unfortunately, as we can see here, Chichester has been reduced to nothing more than a smoldering crater, which has garnered the investigation of none other than Stormwatch, more specifically Stormwatch 1. I do believe in my Stormwatch number 0 video, I mentioned that there are multiple Stormwatch teams. Stormwatch 1, of course, being the A squad, and the higher the number goes, the less powerful the team members become and are deployed for, less pressing matters, as it would be. Here we can see Battalion and Fuji in the forefront. They are joined by 3 other team members who were not featured in Stormwatch number 0. We have Winter, Diva, and my personal favorite of all the Stormwatch team members, Hellstrike. That guy's awesome. Their powers are not specifically detailed in this book. However, Winter has the ability to read energy levels and trace energy signatures. Diva uses sonic powers, and Hellstrike can fly and also use fire-based powers. And they're here investigating this disaster trying to find someone that they have done battle with previously, and they believe that they may have found him. And here on the next page, we see our first shot, which is a full-page pinup of Union. Looking really cool, coming out of the darkness, which doesn't make sense because the previous shot took place during the day, so why is it suddenly nighttime? Unfortunately for Union, he has powers and an energy signature that are very similar to the person that Stormwatch 1 was in pursuit of. Battalion, of course, calls him on this, and Union tries to explain himself. Unfortunately, Battalion isn't buying it because he tells him that Winter can detect energy signatures and that his signature is identical to the one that they were tracing before. Union asks what he can do to explain himself and prove that he is who he says he is, and Battalion wants to know how he got there and where he came from and why he wasn't present when they first showed up. This, of course, triggers a bit of a flashback sequence for us, the reader, to enjoy. This flashback teleports us to 6 months earlier in Old Town, Maine, where we meet our newest character, one Jill Monroe, who is snowed into her house watching the weather outside because the power is out, trying to stay warm, when she happens to notice what she believes is a shooting star, but then starts to be a little bit worried by the fact that it's coming almost directly at her house, and it's glowing green, which is not common for shooting stars. She suddenly freaks out as she believes her home is about to be hit, and there's a giant burst of energy. This, of course, prompts Jill to duck and cover as she experiences this giant burst of energy, assuming that it's going to be accompanied by a massive explosion. However, she is very surprised that not only is there no explosion, there's not even the sound of an impact. And she looks outside of her window to see this figure glowing, emitting massive amounts of green energy, hovering above the frozen river that runs along her house, and then suddenly collapsing unconscious onto said river. She, the Good Samaritan that she is, decides that it's up to her to go and help this new person, and quickly runs out, ties herself to a tree, and crawls out onto the ice to pull him to safety. Thankfully for her, he is conscious enough to accept her help, and she quickly pulls him to the side and realizes that he's doing pretty bad, needs some help, and while she wants to call the authorities for help, there's no way that they can brave this blizzard to get to her in any, reasonable amount of time, so she decides to just bring him inside. So on the next page, we are transported into a dream within a flashback, because that's never difficult to follow. And we see that Union wakes up to the face of a love interest of his named Elia. And then we also find out that Union's real name is Omen. The two of them were very much in love with each other. They speak of a war that they were both fighting in, and that they defeated their opponents, and that the war was finally over, and the two of them are now free to live their lives. They embrace and a kiss. They talk about how they're never going to leave each other's side again. But then Omen is overwhelmed by the sensation of intense heat and that he's burning. And then he cries out for Elia. And suddenly we are transported back into the living room of Jill's home, where Omen shoots up screaming no, very upset by the dream that he has just had. Jill welcomes Omen back to consciousness. He is very upset. He doesn't know where he is. He once again makes sure that she has not alerted any of the authorities to his presence, as he is worried about being tracked by his enemies. She is wondering what's going on, accuses him of being a member of Youngblood. Once again, Youngblood's name coming up in these comics. Whenever there is a new superhero, very often it's just assumed that they're part of the Youngblood team by bystanders. We find out in this point, though, that he is actually a relayer in service to the Protectorate. Union is actually an alien from another world. He's not entirely sure how he was transported to Earth, And at this point, he's actually not even sure where he is. He has no idea that Earth was even a planet. We do find that his world is similar to that of Earth, but not exactly the same. He decides that he's going to get up and find a way back to his unit, but he quickly collapses down to the floor because of how weak he is. Jill offers him some soup, and he doesn't know what chicken noodle soup is. It's not entirely explained what the food source on his homeworld is, but it's drastically different from anything he would find on Earth. Then a few days later, we see here that she's been bringing him books and magazines to read, which he finds very helpful in learning about Earth. He asks if there's any science books that she can bring him to help him figure out a way to get back to his homeworld. She offers to contact Carl Sagan in an aid to help him as a joke, but he, of course, takes it as literal. We then find out that Jill is an artist who moved to Maine to study and paint landscapes, but then quickly decided to instead paint abstracts. This is the way of artists, people. One thing leads to another, and they're constantly on a road to never necessarily sticking with the same thing for long. He then criticizes her painting, not because he thinks it's bad, but just because he thinks that the color scheme doesn't work. So here on the next page, we see that Jill jokes with Union, asking if he's really a soldier now that he's critiquing her artwork. And after that, we see that it has now turned to spring as some time has passed since he first landed on Earth. Union begins to tell Jill that he's starting to try and figure out how he got to Earth in the first place and what he can potentially do to get back to his home world. We then see the two of them walking on a beach, and Jill starts to ask Union, if she can see his powers in action. She wants him to prove to her that he can, in fact, fly, and that he does, in fact, have the abilities that he's told her he has. We also then see our first glimpse and reference of the source of his powers, which is the Justice Stone that you can see right here, which is attached to his chest directly and is not just part of his costume. It's not fully explained what the extent of the Justice Stone's powers are in this issue in particular. We do know some of its abilities. It does seem to give him levels of enhanced strength. It's also how he creates the Justice Staff, which is seen right here. I'd also like to point out that in this shot, the Justice Stone is green and the Justice Staff is green, whereas at the beginning of the book, these things were blue. I believe that the color of the stone and the staff change depending on what abilities Union is using at the time. As we see here, he is using it to fly as he takes off from the ground with a huge burst of energy. But I believe that when he is using the Justice Stone for combat, it instead turns to blue. This is not specifically stated in the issue, but it does seem, from all the context clues available, that this is the case. On the next page, we see Union picking up Jill, carrying her through the night sky. She is quite appropriately freaked out by just being carried through the sky in a man's arms, and is also worried that they're going to be spotted by passerbys on the highway, and she doesn't want people investigating him or tracing him back to her place because she's afraid of what the authorities might do if they find an alien in her presence. After that, we see the two of them talking. At this point, Union begins to explain that he thinks he may have figured out a way that he can try and get back to his home world if he can somehow reverse the process of what got him to Earth in the first place. Jill is upset about hearing him talk this way because, of course, she has fallen in love with him over the past few months. Why wouldn't she? The next shot we see takes place 2 days before the beginning of this issue, we see Jill and Union having dinner at the restaurant that she works at. Union makes the joke of, well, it's not really a joke to him, of Earthlings having to eat monsters as he eats a lobster. She, of course, laughs and tells him that it's a delicacy in Maine. He's then distracted by a news report, which shows this image, a home video taken by a bystander, of 2 quote-unquote aliens who are actually members of the Directorate. The Directorate is, in fact, the force that Union is in opposition to on his homeworld as a member of the Protectorate. I really kind of wish they wouldn't have chosen names that were quite so similar in the two factions that are warring on his homeworld. It seems like they're very, very similar in name. As I stated before in the beginning of the book, it's told by Winter that they have very similar energy signatures, very similar powers and abilities. It's not explained exactly what caused the war that's being fought on his homeworld or why it's been going on for so long. It's stated in his flashback that it's been taking place for generations. His parents fought in the war. He has been fighting in the war. We don't know exactly how long it's been going on for, but it's been quite some time. It's also brought up in this news report that they tried to contact Supreme to see if he knew who these aliens were. Supreme is a character from Rob Liefeld that we haven't gotten into yet, but it's a book that we'll be looking into in the future. He then realizes that he must go to Chichester to face off against these members of the Directorate to make sure that they don't cause any harm to anyone. On the next page, we are now back at Jill's home as Union is telling Jill goodbye as he's about to go face the Directorate soldiers that he saw on the television. Jill then informs him that he should come up with some sort of a code name to give to any members of Youngblood that he may encounter, so that they believe that he's a superhero and not an alien from another planet. She suggests calling himself something after his Justice Stone. He then informs her and us, the reader, that the Justice Stone's powers operate similar to that of the cold fusion process that we have here on Earth, but on his world it's called Union, which is where his name comes from. Now we see him give her a hug goodbye, transform with the costume, and we notice that the Justice Stone and the Justice Staff are now green, and again, he flies when they're green. In the next page, we notice that it's blue. Of course, this page back in the present, where he's deciding how to tell Stormwatch what his intentions are. He then tells them that he's a lawman from his home world, and that he was chasing fugitives from his world onto Earth, and when they realized that they had been discovered, they decided to self-destruct rather than be captured, which is what caused the massive explosion that destroyed all of Chichester. Battalion isn't really necessarily buying this explanation. He believes that Union is still a threat to the safety of everyone in the area and that he needs to come with them. Union has decided now that he's wasting his time trying to gain the trust of Battalion and Stormwatch and that he's going to leave. Battalion has other ideas though and decides to instead shoot a huge psi blast at Union, and it doesn't go exactly the way he planned. So here we can see Union separates his Justice Staff into 2 pieces and deflects the psi blast back at Battalion, which sends him flying. He then reconnects the staff and is very upset, not sure why the members of Stormwatch won't trust him. He doesn't want to fight them, but he's cut off by a sonic energy blast from none other than Diva. She believes that she has the upper hand and charges forward, only to be hit by a huge energy blast from the Justice Staff. She, like we the readers, were unaware that this had ranged capabilities as a weapon. Fuji, of course, decides he's had enough, charges in, catches Union with a big left hook, and then suddenly everything is stopped by Battalion because he's receiving a radio transmission from the Red Cross that they need help rescuing some children who are trapped in a basement. Winter objects because he believes that it's a bad idea to leave Union behind and that he's going to pose a danger to others. Battalion tells him that they can track him down again if they need to now that they know his energy signature, and that right now saving the children trapped in the basement is the more pressing matter at hand. As we see the Stormwatch team rush off to save the two kids who are trapped in the basement, we do notice on this panel and this panel that there is a mistake made in the illustrations. In the Stormwatch comics, Fuji is drawn only having 3 fingers, and he does not have feet in the Stormwatch comics. Instead, his ankles just end in stumps. However, we see that in this comic, he has feet and a normal 5-fingered hand like anyone else. I believe this might be the only time that Fuji is drawn as having pretty standard human anatomy like that, but I could be wrong. But it's the only time that I can recall ever seeing him drawn in this manner. Fuji tries to dig the kids out, and Battalion decides to put a psionic barricade around them to protect them. As Fuji digs, the ground collapses underneath him, and he falls in underneath. This, of course, puts his weight as well as all of the other weight of all the debris on top of the shield. Battalion is struggling to hold it. Hellstrike decides he's going to blast the children out with as much fire as he can muster, but Union quickly cuts him off and tells him that this is too dangerous because he doesn't know what sort of flammable gases may be down there. And Hellstrike says, have you just been waiting around for your time to strike? They're arguing with each other, and Battalion decides that he's had enough. On the next page, we see Battalion yelling at Union to do whatever he's going to do, be that save the kids or attack Stormwatch. Union, of course, being a heroic figure, is not interested in attacking Stormwatch at all and uses his justice staff to drill a hole through the ground, dive into the ground, and quickly save both of the children and Fuji. We see here in the next panel that the children are being checked out by the medical personnel from the Red Cross. Fuji and Battalion are now talking with Union, trying to figure out why he came back to help them, when we suddenly see here that Winter and Diva have noticed something underneath the basement, some sort of large chamber. Battalion and Fuji want to go check it out and determine that it's not of any danger and that it had nothing to do with Union. Union, of course, does not object because he wants them to know that he's on their side. As it turns out, the large open cavity underneath the basement was in fact nothing, and Battalion, while happy that they didn't find anything dangerous down there, is still very skeptical of Union. You notice here that Union's Justice Stone is blue now, and I think that's because that he was engaged in combat. So I believe the color only changes when he changes the Justice Staff's abilities to do a different action, but I could be wrong about that. Union asks Battalion what he can do to gain his trust, and Battalion says, we need to know where you're at, how to get a hold of you, who you are. So Union tells him that he can take his fingerprints, amongst other things. Later on, we're transported back to the home of Jill, where she's very happy to see Union back safe and sound. And here's where we find out that while there were the 2 Directorate soldiers that were shown on the news, as it turns out, Chichester was a secret base of operations for the Directorate on Earth, and that there were literally hundreds of them there posing as human beings. When Union discovered them, they believed that he was an advanced scout unit, so rather than blow their cover, they decided to detonate a self-destruct unit for the entire base, and also wipe out the entire town. Union is very upset by this. He believes that the only reason so many innocent humans died is because of his presence, and that if he had not gone there, that they would all still be alive. Jill consoles him and tells him that the only reason that they're dead is because of the Directorate and nothing else, and that he does not have any responsibility for the actions of the Directorate and whatever evil they may have been planning on Earth. Union tells Jill that the only thing, or whatever doesn't kill him, will only make him stronger. She laughs and tells him that she's going to hurl if she hears him say that again. And then we are shown an image of what appears to most to be a weather satellite, but it's not. It's actually the secret outer space base of this being, who is the guy that Stormwatch had originally been chasing. His name is Regent. He is the crown prince of the Directorate from, we find out, the name of the home world that he and Union are from, Agena. And he's very, very upset about the fact that the Directorate base was discovered and that so many of his people were killed in the explosion, and he vows to get revenge on those who caused this. That's the end of the story. On the next page, we see an advertisement for the Art of Homage Studios, which is a book I have never seen before. Apparently, it was 48 pages long. It had swimsuit pinups, how to draw the Homage way, which is a play on how to draw the Marvel way, and facts about the studio itself. I would very much like to get my hands on one of these at some point. A lot of the people that are featured in it are artists that I really like, and I would like to see what exactly this book was all about. So hopefully one day I'll come across it in the back issue section of a comic book store someday. The next 2 pages are a giant advertisement for Wildcats number 5. We see here featuring an image of Zealot and of Grifter. It looks super cool, and of course, being another Wildstorm title, is featured prominently. And why wouldn't it be? If you're going to make a whole host of books, you should be advertising those books in other books that you're producing to generate as much buzz about them as you can. So here on the final page of the book, we see Reunion, which is the letter section of Union. And we also find out that it's not going to be called Reunion. This was just a placeholder name that they used for this first book. And there's actually going to be a contest to come up with the permanent name. And for winning the contest, you got a full-size poster pinup of the first issue cover of the book, which would have been so awesome. If I ever found that, I would be hard-pressed not to offer a large sum of money to buy it to whoever owns it, assuming someone still has it somewhere. The rest of the section is really just a lot of thanks to people who helped in the production of the book, and, you know, just a little bit of a, you know, thanks for all the help I've received from Michael Heisler. And on the very last portion of the inside cover, we have an advertisement for the Wizard-produced bags and boards, which are the Pro Skins and the Backbones and the My Guards. I was completely unaware that Wizard was producing their own series of bags and boards for comic books. I can't say that I've ever seen them anywhere in packages. I can't imagine that they kept making them for very long, or if they did, they just didn't get widely circulated. If you ever bought any of these, let me know if they were any good down in the comics. I'd be interested in knowing what kind of quality they were. And that was Union number 1. I really, really enjoy this book. I always thought that Union was a super cool character and was pretty unique. Unfortunately, I was in the vast minority in thinking this way because this book was not popular at all. It was not very successful. It started with a mini series just like Cyberforce did, and then later got an ongoing monthly series. I have all of those issues, and despite the fact that Cyberforce was not super popular, it was drastically more popular than Union ever was. And it's sad. I really did enjoy this book and kind of wish that the character could have gotten some more love. And it's sad to think that now that Union is in the hands of DC, it's never going to be a character that we see any real love given to again in all likelihood. But if you enjoyed today's video and felt like you learned something new about a character you had never heard of before, please feel free to like and comment and subscribe. Thanks for watching and have a great day.